Okay, well, today is July 16th, 2011. My name is Mary Larson. I am with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at Oklahoma State. And I'm here today at the Oklahoma City Museum of Art with Mrs. Emma Lee Bennett, who will be talking about her memories of the 1930s. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate it. To start out with, could you tell me a little bit about when and where you were born?
I was born at Tuttle, Oklahoma, a mile east and a half north of Tuttle.
Okay. And you could, for the section roads, that was probably.
Mm-hmm.
Now, were you born at home?
Yes.
Or, okay.
Yes.
And
In 1922.
okay. Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, there was 8 of us.
Okay.
4 boys and 4 girls.
Okay. And where were you in the lineup?
There was 4 older, and then I was the oldest of the next 4.
Okay.
So
you worked in shifts.
I guess so.
As far as the girls went, were you the youngest or oldest, or somewhere in
No,
the
there was 2 boys and a girl,
Okay.
and then a boy, and 3 girls and then a boy.
Okay. Now, how much older were your oldest siblings, and how much younger
My
were your
oldest brother was 9 years older than me,
Okay.
and then my youngest brother was, born in 34, so I was about 12 years older than he.
So you had a good range
Mhm.
in there. What did your folks do for a living?
Well, my daddy went to barber school. Well, and that was not very profitable because people didn't have money to go to barber shops, so they cut their own hair. And then earlier, though, he went to a business school, and he kept books for his dad. He was county assessor over at Fairview, Oklahoma. And then he kept books for my grandparents in their store. And he was a Raleigh man. He sold Raleigh goods. And he tried farming. And that was about what he did. So.
Okay. And how about your mom? Did she work
She
in the home and
she went to college and was wanting to be a missionary, but she got married instead. And she worked in her dad's store. And then after she got married, she didn't work. She just took care of the kids. So.
Where did she go to school?
She went to Oklahoma up Enid. And then she went to Phillips University at Enid. And so that was where she went.
Okay. Now, do you know where your family was from originally?
Well, Papa came from Illinois. He was born in Illinois. And Mama was born in Kansas. And then they moved down by Enid, Oklahoma, in that area. And,
do you know what brought them to that part of Oklahoma, and then what brought them down to the Tuttle area?
Well, my granddaddy was in the run, and that was where he, down by Kingfisher in that area where he was in the run. And
Okay.
Mama and Grandma lived in a dugout, and Grandpa was on the run most of the time trying to find what they wanted to do. And so.
Did your mom ever tell stories about that growing
Oh, yeah.
up?
She tell about snakes coming in, at the top of the dugout and getting a drink out of the water bucket. And Grandma used to tell about, she'd call desperados who'd come in front, run by with their horses in front of the dugout. And she and just my mother were there by themselves. But I guess it was quite frightening just to be alone in that place. So.
Have you ever been back to that area where the dugout was?
No, I never did. No.
Do you know, did they build a house on that property later? Or?
No, it was when they moved to Oklahoma, they built their house.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, could you describe the home that you grew up in? If there was one particular one, or?
Well, we never had a very nice home. The one I remember was where I was born. It was, in fact, they just a few years ago I don't know whether they tore it down or what. The people that bought the land, but we lived is on a farm, and we had trees for fruit and berries and all stuff like that. And then we moved to Walcomas. No, we won't move to Bethany. And there Papa ran a feed store and a livestock and a filling station. And we were just there about a year. And then we moved to Walcomas, and that's where he sold Raleigh goods. So. And the houses were just little 4-roomed houses, they were nothing special. And then when we moved to Tuttle, we moved in a little 2-roomed house by my grandparents. And the house across the road came empty, and we moved into it. And that's where we lived until I got married.
Okay, now who lived there with you? Was it just your parents and your siblings? Yeah. Although I guess there were enough of them, that would have been a full house.
Oh, yeah. My granddaddy used to come and stay with us, for a while and help with the farming and the milking and all that.
Was that on your mom or your dad's side?
My dad's.
Okay. When you got to Tuttle, were there other buildings besides the house on the lot?
Well, yeah, it was barns, and because it was a farm place.
About how many acres?
There was 90 in the place where we lived, and it belonged to my granddaddy.
Okay.
Then Granddaddy Crouch, my mother's dad's.
Okay, so you had your grandparents nearby too.
Oh yeah.
Any other relatives or?
No, just my grandparents.
Okay. Now, what were some of your chores when you were growing up?
Well, oh my, we hoed corn, and we hoed the berries, and Mama would work in the garden, and we would fix the meals. We'd go out with a wire catcher and catch a chicken and wring its neck off, and we'd fry chicken, and so.
For people who don't know what with that little catcher, can you describe that?
Yeah, it was just a long, heavy wire that had a hook on the end of it, and you'd go around in the yard and hunt for a rooster and catch it by the leg and
sort of hook it. And
yeah.
Okay. So did your chores change over time? So as you were getting older?
I helped milk some, and Papa had sheep, and I'd help herd sheep, and every year we'd change the straw in the ticks for the beds. And every time when they'd thrash, they'd have a straw stack, and we'd dump the old straw and put in new straw.
Oh, and I bet that smelled good.
Yeah. And then when I got older, I went to Oklahoma City and worked for a doctor's family, and they had 3 children, and they paid me $3 a week, room and board. And they were expecting another one when I got there. And so when he was born, they increased my salary to $4 a week. So.
And how old were you when you?
I was 15. Yeah. And I worked for them 3 years and 1 Christmas vacation. But I always saved up my money and bought school clothes whenever.
So you were going to high school at the same time?
Yes, I worked through the summer, and then I'd come back home and go to school.
Okay.
I remember the first year I made $36 and all summer long. And I bought a new coat and a dress and a pair of shoes, and I thought I was really dressed up.
Well, you mentioned before that on the farm your dad had sheep. Do you remember how many head of sheep?
No, I don't remember how many, but.
Did you have some cows too?
Yeah, we had chickens and pigs.
And as far as the farm itself, you mentioned having corn and berries. Was it mostly in corn or?
Well, we had some wheat
Mhm.
and, of course, 90 acres, and there's pasture on some of it too, and
Mhm.
that's where the cows ran through the day. So
Now, how did you work the land? Did you have?
we had horses,
Okay.
and later years, my granddaddy gave my dad $500, and he bought an old secondhand John Deere tractor, Poppin' Johnny, we called it, because that was the way they sounded, and the thing was always getting out of time, and Papa had the hardest time keeping that tractor running. But
What year do you think that might have been when he bought
let me
that?
see, that was probably in about 1937, 8, somewhere along there.
Okay. And what kind of draft horses did you have?
What
You mentioned having horses for the.
I don't
Do you
know. They were
remember
just
what?
horses.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think we had a couple of mules too that we used for farming.
Did they have an attitude?
Well, I don't remember about that.
Okay. Sometimes some of the memorable ones.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned that your family had a garden. What
Oh,
types
yes,
of things?
we had a very good garden, and Mama spent so much time after they got it planted and things was ready. She'd go pick that, and all of us helped prepare. And she canned so much, and I know she would send us to the cellar to get a jar of something, and oh, it was just beautiful. She took so much pride in her canning, and she'd line them all up on the shelves, just perfect. And I said it was so much fun to go down there and get the things off the shelf.
Mhm.
But we didn't have much money, but we had a good food.
Mhm. Now, did you? I was going to say, were you helping your mom with the canning at that
Oh yeah.
point? Mhm.
And
And
with the kid, we would go pick the stuff and then bring it in and help prepare. If it needs shelled or snapped or whatever, well, that's what we did. So.
And did you tend to do those in big batches? So you'd have a couple of days in a row where you were doing nothing but canning, essentially.
Yeah.
Now, since we're on food, let's talk a little bit about that. Did you have a favorite meal when you were growing up?
Yes. My favorite meal was fried chicken, corn on the cob, black-eyed peas, and sliced tomatoes and onions.
That sounds really good.
Yeah.
Right for lunch.
Yeah. Do you remember if there were any foods that were hard to get during the Depression?
Well, we never bought very much. I know Papa would, if he had money, he would get several sacks of flour and stack them in the bedroom and cover them over with a sheet. And I remember by the time Mama would get the flour used up, there would be weevil in it, and she would just sift and get those weevil out. We didn't throw anything away. And
Right. You just made sure you got them out of there.
but we had sugar and flour and cornmeal and things to cook with. And of course, we always had milk, and we had a separator to separate the cream from the milk. And I remember there's a poor family lived across the field from us, and the mother had died, and there was 3 little kids, and the dad was raising those little kids, and they would walk across the field and carry a bucket to get separated milk so they would have milk. I said we didn't have much, but Mom always shared with others that had less. So.
Mhm. Now, were there some foods that were just for special occasions that you remember growing up?
Well, yes. I remember Mom would always want to know what I wanted for my birthday. I didn't care much for sweets, but I'd tell her I wanted beefsteak. Well, we didn't butcher beef back then, and we always had the hogs that we butchered and chickens. But she would have to go to the store and get some steak so I could have steak for my birthday.
And that was always a special treat.
That was special. Very.
Mm-hmm. Now, were there any types of recipes that were really important to your family, either for cultural reasons or because it was someone's favorite recipe, Aunt Tilly's favorite recipe, or something like that?
You know, Mama used to make a coconut cake, and it was a layer cake, and she always took pride in her baking and everything. And she made Waldorf salad, and that was so good. And anything she made, it was very good. She was a good cook.
That's always good, and so you had someone to learn from.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Now, when did you start helping your mom in the kitchen, for example?
Well, I wasn't very old. I imagine I was 11 or 12, somewhere along there. And my sister and brother and I were long about the same age. My older sister, she was not much on cooking, but she would clean house and she would sew. But my sister, that was just a few, well, not quite 2 years younger than me, we would cook meals. And my brother, well, I remember one time went out, was hoeing in the blackberries. And he came in, he was so hot and tired, and he said, "Em, would you change jobs with me?" So I did. I went and hoed in the blackberries, and he came in and helped my sister with cooking. And I remember there was a snake out there, and that scared me so, and I chopped the ground all to pieces trying to get rid of that snake. But
do you remember what kind it was?
No, it was probably just plain old bull snake, but any kind of snake scared me anyway. So.
Well, are there recipes from childhood that you remember, like your mother's coconut cake or something like that you still make?
No, I don't.
Mm-hmm. Are there any recipes from childhood that you never want to see again?
No.
It sounds like your mom was a good cook.
Yeah,
so
she was. Yeah.
Did your family have a smokehouse?
No, they didn't.
Mm-hmm. Okay, how did you? And then
my grandparents did, and we always took the meat to there. Mm-hmm. I remember one time they, it had to be a certain temperature so it could cool out just right. One year it wasn't as cold as it should have been, and they went ahead and cured the meat. And then they would put it in a box and keep it. And I remember one time Mama went to cut it into a ham, and it hadn't cured out, and it was spoiled. And we were so disappointed because we was looking forward to that cured ham. But we had to throw all that away because it wasn't any good.
Well, speaking of keeping things cool, how did you have an ice box or a spring house? Or...
No, I said I don't have. I know they would put to keep the milk. They would put it in the window and keep the cloth wet all the time around it, so that if there's any wind, it would cool that. And I remember a lot of times, from morning to night, it would get kind of, they'd say blinky, not quite sour, but it wasn't very good to drink. But it was very hard to keep anything from spoiling. Mm-hmm. Nowadays they say don't keep things out. We'd cook dinner, and what was left over, that's what we had for supper. So I said it's a wonder we didn't all die, but we didn't.
Well, what would you say, talking about the different things that both your parents were doing, what would you say an average day in the 1930s would have been like for your mom?
She would get up early of a morning, and I remember sometimes she wouldn't have anything to fix for breakfast, and she'd go out and catch a chicken and fry chicken and make gravy and biscuits before we went to school. And then she always told people that she lived at the house where there was a washing hanging on the line. And she'd wash nearly every day and have something hanging on the line. So she was busy all day long with 8 kids. That was, and people would give us hand-me-down clothes, and she'd work them over so we'd have clothes to wear. And
Was she a good seamstress?
yeah, she was. Mama liked to read and study more than she liked to sew, but she always managed to get those things done anyway. But
So did you grow up in a house with books around,
Um,
or at least?
not too much, but anything Mama could get a hold of, she would read it.
Mhm.
And I remember my grandparents lived across the road, and we got our mail in the same mailbox. And she would go down when the mail carrier came, she'd go down and read the paper, stand there at the mailbox and read the paper before Grandma and Grandpa got their mail. So, but,
Now, what about your dad? What would an average day be like for him?
oh, he was busy all day too. He trying to have feed for the cows and feed for the pigs and whatever.
So would he get up in the morning and do chores before he went in if he was
He was
in town?
Yeah.
Or?
Well, yeah, he didn't. I know one time there wasn't much to do on the farm, and the money was very scarce, and so he went up to Mino up near Enid and worked on a farm with some people, so we could send money back home. So, but I remember we charged groceries for a year because we just didn't have money to buy things. And my sister didn't mind going to the store. We'd, of course, ride the school bus, and she'd go to the store and charge it, and I wouldn't. I didn't want to charge the groceries. And she would always charge the groceries. But at the end of the year, Papa would pay his bill. And how the storekeepers can manage to make it, I guess not all people were like we were, but anyway.
Well, speaking of school, you mentioned taking the school bus in. Where did you go to school? In Tuttle?
Tuttle, yeah. We lived 2 miles from the school, and we could either walk a mile and ride the bus a mile, or we could ride clear around the route. Most time we went clear around the route. But we sold milk to a neighbor. She lived half a mile west of us. And we would walk up there with a quart of milk, sold it to her for a nickel. And she'd go by on how many times a day, but we'd still have to go take that milk and walk up there and take that milk to her.
Now, what do you remember about the school in Tuttle? What was it like?
Well, it was a good school, and we had, of course, had favorite teachers that, and the ones that were the most strict was the ones I liked best because I could learn. But the ones that seemed indifferent, we got by with more. But we had a good school, I felt like.
Were there any of the teachers that you remember that had grown up in that area too, that were local, or?
Oh yeah, there's several that now that graduated from Tuttle School. So I feel like they're real caring teachers. They're interested in the kids there at Tuttle. So
What was the school building itself like?
well, it was. The year we moved back from Wacomas in 1930, they built a new high school, and it was brick, and it was a real good school. And the grade school was a brick school.
How many students were in your class? Do you remember?
The year I graduated, there was 40,
Okay. So
and I graduated in 1940. So that was easy to remember.
That was a good sized
Yeah, it
class.
was.
When you were younger and had recess and so on, what games would you?
We played jacks.
Mm-hmm.
We sat on the sidewalk and played jacks. And we'd, of course, play Red Rover and London bridges and all those things. And,
All the same things kids have played.
right, for
Forever.
years.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now, did you take your lunch to school usually?
Yes, we did.
Leftovers?
Yes.
Or
We didn't have sacks, and I remember Mama wrapping them up at our lunch in newspaper, and that's the way we'd take our lunch.
Mhm.
And she'd always try to have something, good for lunch, and she made bread all the time. And I got so tired of homemade bread, and when we could have bought bread, I really liked to bought bread, but the homemade bread crumbled too easy. But I remember if Mama didn't have anything to fix for a sandwich, if she had beans left over, she'd mash those up and put pickles and boiled eggs, and we had bean sandwiches we took to school.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
The way you describe it.
Yeah.
When you were in high school, were there particular activities at school that you were involved with?
Well, yeah, I was involved in nearly all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I was an FHO, Future Homemakers of Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was the secretary of that. And I remember going to contests at Norman and Oklahoma City. And I remember one year the teacher wanted me to dress for school. And so I had made a dress, and it was just kind of a plain dress. And she said, well, we need to dress that up a little. So I made a bolero and a sash to go with it. And I had a hat and a pair of shoes that I'd bought. And my friend, her mother took her, and she bought everything new. And I won first. And I was so proud because I'd made all that, and her mother had taken her, and she was really dressed up. But anyway, and I tried to play in the band. I played clarinet, and I was football queen the year of 39, in the fall of 39.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I was just like the rest of them.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I was poor, I had, good.
Well, and was there that much difference between your family and any of the other families
No,
at that point?
we were all about the same.
Mm-hmm.
And when we have our class, we did have class reunions. They're all gone, but 3 of us now. And we were, of course, real amazed at the professions that people got into, but we were all just poor country people. And the war came along after we graduated, and so many of them went to the service, and there was 2 or 3 of them didn't come back. But anyway, they all turned out, real good. So even though we were poor, the girls that I run around with that lived in town seemed like they had a little more than we did because their parents had a regular job, but the farmers had a hard time making it.
Yeah, in that environment with everything that was going on.
And it was so dry and hot, and when the Dust Bowl came, those things, that wind would come in from the west just rolling, and Mom would have to get wet sheets and put over the windows to keep the dust from getting in the house.
Mm-hmm.
But you'd take those down, and it was just drifted in this dust was drifted in the.
Are there any particular dust storms that you remember growing up?
Yes, the ones where it would roll in, just look like a cloud. That was the ones that impressed me a lot. But I remember the wind blew so much, and we had to walk everywhere we went because, when we moved from Oklahoma, we had a 29 Dodge. And I think I was about 10, and a neighbor borrowed it to go to his brother's birthday. The next morning, early the next morning, Papa turned over and the sky, everything was just red. And he woke up and said that the barn was on fire and the car was honking. And it burned the car up. And of course, we didn't have a car for several years. And then when we did get one, it was an old 29 Dodge. That thing shimmied all over the road. You couldn't hardly drive it. But anyway, I remember my oldest sister, went to Weatherford to business school. And she lived with a preacher and his wife and their kids. She took care of their kids, did the ironing and everything. And that was when I was working in Oklahoma City. And I remember riding the Interurban over to El Reno to catch my parents. And we all went over to Weatherford in that old 29 Dodge. And we stayed till after dark. And Papa could hardly see the road. The lights were so dim on it. And he was having my sister and I watch the road for him. And I said, we never did have much. One time I drove it to church and I was pulling into the curb and the brake, it didn't have any brake on it. And I told Mama to grab the emergency brake. And by the time she got it grabbed, I'd already run into the curb, knocked the bumper down, and we had to get some wire to wire the bumper. So we had some good experiences back then.
That sounds like it was quite a car.
Yeah.
Was that the one your dad used to use when he sold Raleigh goods?
No, he had a kind of a little truck, and he had a little case of a thing on the back of it. And he would go around the route, and he always took gum for the little kids. And every once in a while, he would take just one of us. And Mama would fix us a lunch, and we'd go with Papa. And we'd get to eat lunch with Papa. And the kids were all thrilled to see him because he gave him a stick of gum. And my worked for a thrashing crew. And I don't know, he's probably 12, 13. And he borrowed the truck to go get his money. And he was going west of our house and hit some sand, and it turned upside down in a culvert. And it messed all that up, and it didn't hurt him, and my brother was with him. It didn't hurt either one of the boys, but it messed up the car or the truck. So. And I remember he gave it to my two older boys to work on and to make a strip down. So that was the end of the Raleigh truck. Mm-hmm. But it got to where he couldn't sell Raleigh goods. People didn't have the money to pay for the Raleigh goods. Mm-hmm. And they would give him chickens, anything that they could pay for. I remember one time they gave Papa a gasoline cook stove. Well, Mama wouldn't use it. She was afraid it would blow up with that gasoline. And so we just had things given to him for the Raleigh goods, which was money we needed for it. But
because you had the chickens.
I had chickens.
Mm-hmm. But, yeah. Now, you talked a little bit about being able to go into town, for school and doing things when you were in town for that. But when you were growing up, would your family do anything special on Saturdays or Sundays?
No, nothing. Excuse me. Thank you. No, we didn't have anything special. I know at 4th of July, Papa'd maybe get some sparklers or something like that for us, and we'd go to uncles and aunts in Lahoma. They lived on a farm and we lived in town, and they had about as many kids as Mom and Papa did. And the girls would build them a playhouse in a silo, and the boys would ride horses. And I remember my aunt, she would have fried chicken, homemade ice cream, and they had a cistern, and they had this well over the cistern, and it came up through the kitchen, and they had it on a cabinet. And Ma, we thought that was really something, pump water in the house. But
that would have been something.
yeah, that was one thing, we did special, was going to our kinfolks and visit with our cousins. So,
well, in terms of going into town, how often would you do that besides for school?
We didn't go in very often. We lived 1.5 miles from town, and we would, after our car burned, we'd have to walk to town and carry the cream and eggs so that we could buy a few groceries. But and we'd always hope a neighbor would come along so we could ride into town. But and then when school activities, why, we'd catch a ride with somebody, but we had to walk there everywhere we went till Papa got this old, I don't remember, it was 1938, somewhere along there. I know I was working in Oklahoma City in the summer when he bought that. So.
You mentioned the milk and cream and eggs and so on. Do you remember what specific things cost back then? I mean, how much you'd get paid for that, but how much it would cost?
I think a dozen eggs was about a nickel. And I remember one time Papa raised watermelons, and they were really nice watermelons. And he had my brother, just older than me, take them to town to sell them, and put them in the wagon with the team, the team pulling the wagon. And he'd come home with about as many as they had. People didn't have the nickel to pay for a watermelon. That was something they could do without. And so that wasn't very profitable.
Yeah. What was Tuttle like when you were younger? I mean, town-wise.
Well, it's just about like it now.
How many churches, and was there a town square?
We had a lot of churches. Still do. Yeah, we have. I haven't counted them, but there's one just not very, very far away. They're all pretty close. So.
What did most people in that area do for a living when you were growing up?
Well, most of them was farmers.
Was your family musical? Did you have a lot of music in your family, or?
One of my brothers played by ear, and we did have a piano, and Mama had taken music lessons, and she taught my oldest sister to play, and she tried to teach me, but I couldn't figure out what she was trying to tell me. And when I was in about the 5th grade, we had a music teacher that taught us how to read notes. And I'd go home and write the notes in the book and on the piano, and I learned to play that way. And so now I've been practicing quite a bit, and I'm getting a little bit better. Not like Kelly, though. She's a good musician.
Well, what kind of music did you like when you were younger?
I always played the hymns. Still do.
Any particular favorites?
Well, not really. I just go through the songbook and play them all. So.
Yeah. Did you have community get-togethers when you were younger? Either church potlucks or dances?
I don't remember them having potluck, but I remember the youth group would have weenie roasts and things like that. I remember the first pair of pants I had. I had to talk Mama into letting me have. She wouldn't let me wear pants. It's just a dress. And I said, well, the others are going to wear pants. And she did let me make a pair of slacks to wear to the weaner.
About how old, if this was youth group, you were probably high school?
Yeah, I was in high school. Yeah.
Okay. Now, did you folks have a radio at your home?
Yes.
Okay. Did you all sit around and listen?
I remember one when we lived at Walcomas, especially, it run by battery. And Papa would drive the car up to the window and hook the car battery up to the radio so we could listen to it.
Okay. Do you remember hearing any of the fireside chats or anything, Roosevelt's fireside chats?
I don't remember. I remember listening to Amos and Andy and some of those.
Do you remember your parents talking about politics at all? Or?
Well, they didn't talk politics much because Papa was Democrat, Mama was Papa was Republican, Mama was Democrat. Her dad was a county commissioner, and he ran on the Democrat ticket. And he was county commissioner, Grady County. And then Papa's dad was county commissioner in Major County. And so he ran on the Republican ticket. But they discussed problems, about the country and all that. But as far as politics, they didn't talk much about it. So,
do you remember hearing what they thought of President Roosevelt? Or?
Well, I think they thought he was doing a pretty good job.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember hearing about the WPA and the CCC?
Yes. Papa was timekeeper on WPA.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there must have been some WPA projects in the area.
There was.
Okay.
And I remember going with Grandpa. He was, county commissioner, had to look after that. And he was one that got Papa the job as timekeeper. And I remember going down by Amber, and they were working on a bridge. And it was WPA people working there. And I remember my daddy was, of course, keeping the time for the workers there. So,
do you remember, were there any CCC camps?
Yes, I remember Yukon. There was one there, and I remember one of the boys that was in my class. His daddy was he belonged to CCC camp. They set out trees and things. And
do you remember anybody that you might have grown up with, any younger folks that were involved with the CCC?
No, I don't remember.
Mostly
that.
Older.
No.
Okay. Now, growing up, in farming areas, we've talked to other people who said, well, we knew technically there was a depression, but it didn't affect us much. But other people said, well, it was where we were, it was horrible. So it didn't bother me. Mm-hmm. It my sister that's older, it embarrassed her, but we had I don't know, she was just different, and she didn't associate with and play like we other younger ones did. And we made our own play. We'd play house. And she was just more of a stay in the house person, read and keep house. She wanted things cleaned up, and she was just different type person. And she didn't associate much with people because she was embarrassed. But my sister and I, we just went on with life, and accepted it like it was. And we knew we didn't have money, but we had, my parents were, they had taught us moral values and love. And I just didn't like anything I didn't feel like, so. What did you understand about the Depression? I mean, when you were younger,
that was just something that I accepted because that's the way life was, and so I didn't.
Do you remember anybody coming through on trains or people traveling through your town when you were?
When we lived at Walcomas. I don't know whether these hobos would tell each other, but we always got the hobos off the train because Mama would fix them a good meal. I remember her fixing a meal, and they'd sit out on the porch and eat their food. And just every few days, there'd be somebody wanted something to eat, so Mom would prepare for it. So,
Mm-hmm. Do you know where folks were coming from and going to? I mean, were they on their way to someplace particular, or just looking for work?
Just going, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Were they did they stop and do odd jobs like for your mom? Or?
Well, they would have, I guess. I don't know, but I just remember them coming, and Mama would fix them something to eat.
Mm-hmm. Earlier, it said you remembered seeing gypsies.
Yes.
When you were younger.
There's one particular time. It's when we lived at Bethany, and I was probably 4 years old, and we were out there in the yard with my sister and I, and she said that they were gypsies. They came to get some gas. Well, I went running in the house and looked out the door. I didn't know what gypsies were, but I thought it was something bad, so it scared me anyway.
So was it a group of folks going through?
Yes, it was a family.
Did they have the wagon, or did they?
They were in some kind of a vehicle.
At the time.
I remember after I married my first husband, we lived south of town, and a gypsy family lived. Well, they had a wagon, and they had a goat and some dogs, and they stayed down by our mailbox for quite some time. And they decided to leave, and they stopped by our house and wanted to know if I had anything left from breakfast that they could have. And I said, well, we just had cereal, but I did have a ham bone in the icebox that I would let them have. And oh, this woman was so grateful to have that ham bone. So.
Well, during the Dust Bowl, I mean, the Depression was going on. You had the Dust Bowl. You talked a little bit about the storms blowing through. How do you think the Dust Bowl affected your family particularly?
Well, they couldn't grow crops whenever it was so dry and hot, and so that was when Papa had to get out and go find work somewhere else, because we still stayed there on the farm, and our Mama would milk the cows, and we'd help her, of course, with that. But I don't remember that it lasted too many years. But I know in the summer I worked in the city because we all had to do our part to make ends meet. So, but Grandpa owned the farm, and we just lived on this place, and so.
Did you mentioned you had corn and some berries and so on. Did you have any cotton out there?
We had some cotton, and I remember when I was little, we lived on another farm where I was born, and I remember Mama picking cotton, and my brother and I went to the field with her, and my little sister, we had a tub that we carried her in, and we'd ride on the sack with Mama, picking cotton. I thought, how cruel of us. She's pulling that cotton, and but of course I was little and didn't think anything about it till later years, and I thought she had enough to pull without us being on there. But she said she didn't mind because we were there with her, so.
Sounds like you had a good mother.
I did have.
Did anybody have any health issues during the Dust Bowl? I mean, anything?
My sister, just younger than me, she had asthma, and anything like that. I know when we'd have to fill up the ticks, for those mattresses, she couldn't get around much dust because of that. So
We can take a quick break. Okay, so we were talking about some health issues, that your sister had asthma, and at one point you mentioned that your brother had scarlet fever. Can you talk a little bit about that?
well, I remember I was just small. I was probably 6, something like that, and my daddy, of course, that was when he was selling Raleigh goods, and we had a garage, and he moved out to the garage so he could go on with his work. But they wouldn't let anyone in our house, and we had this red sign on the front, quarantined. And of course, we kids would go out and play, but no one was allowed, to come in other than the family. So.
And were you selling the eggs and milk and so on at that point?
Not.
That wasn't that same farm. Okay.
No, we just lived in town then. Okay. So.
Do you remember how long the quarantine lasted?
No, I don't. Probably a week or so.
Now, I understand during the Dust Bowl, a lot of places had issues with grasshoppers and rabbits and so on. Did you ever experience any of that around Tuttle?
Oh, yeah. And, I was out to my place. I moved to town recently, and the grasshoppers are thick out there now. And I thought that was way back when, in the 30s, that they were so thick. They just ate up everything. Just ate all the leaves off. And
I understand that the government required people to slaughter their cattle at one point during the Depression and the Dust Bowl. Do you remember that?
I remember that, and I just couldn't figure that out. I don't know why they did that. When there's too many to feed, or what? Didn't have feed for them, and
did that affect your family at all?
We didn't have that many, so it didn't.
Did you ever have trouble feeding the horses and the cows at that point?
No, we always had enough feed. So, and we had a pasture that they run in, and there was a creek ran through it, and where there was creek, there was usually enough grass along the creek that they could
keep them happy. Did you know any families that left for California or Oregon?
No, I didn't know any. But
now, following right after the Dust Bowl and the Depression, you had World War II. You mentioned that a little bit earlier. What effect did that have on the community?
Well, so many of the young men had to go. I remember it was 1940 when I graduated. Of course, that was before Pearl Harbor, but so many of the boys in my class had to go, and then the classes, following that, and I know my husband he belonged to the National Guard. Well, when he graduated from high school, which is in 1937, his mother lived in Missouri, and so he went up to work in the fields up there, and he got a discharge from the National Guard. But then he came to see me graduate, and we decided to get married. And then when the war came along, we had Kenny. Kenny was already born. And then he got his questionnaire to fill out for the draft. And he went in for his physical, and they said he had allergic rhinitis. I guess he was allergic to things. And then my second son was born, and he never did go to service, even though he did belong to the National Guard at one time. And we farmed, and then it was just 90 acres, and so he had to get a job, to do something else. So
And what did he do during that time?
He I know before our second son was born, he drove a gas and oil truck, and then later he got a substitute mail carrier job, and then he got a job in the post office as clerk, and he transferred to Amber, which is just about 10 miles south of Tuttle, and he got a rural route, and he carried the mail 9 months when he died, and so that was what we did.
Okay, so you were talking about the fact that your husband had a postal route.
Mm-hmm. He was mail carrier at Amber and carried it for 9 months, and he had a brain hemorrhage and didn't survive, and so I carried the mail 3 months until they got a regular carrier, and then the boys and I moved to town, and the farm belonged to his mother, and so she said I could live there as long as I wanted to, but my oldest son, her dad, was working in the drugstore. The druggist gave him a job, and my younger son was just 13, and so it was just handier for him to go to school and Kenny working, and so anyway, I didn't know how to do anything but clean houses for people, and so in the fall I started to college down at Chickasha, and I went. Well, the job opened up at the post office as the clerk, and in November I started working in the afternoon, and the one that was filling in worked of a morning, and I finished my semester, and then I started working 5 hours a day at the post office, and I was able to get my kids through college, and I continued to work there till almost 25 years. So
that must have been quite a shock, though, because your husband would have been really young at the
oh
time.
yeah, no indication of anything wrong, and except the evening before he had a headache, and the next morning I asked him how he was, and he said, "Oh, I'm okay." He said, "My head hurts a little, and he made the route okay. And he stopped at the mailbox and visited with our mail carrier, Tuttle mail carrier. And he, as he was coming up the hill, he noticed our cows were out. And the neighbor saw him stop, and he met him just about as he got there, and he stooped over to pick up a rock, and when he did, he almost fell, and the neighbor caught him, and sent his wife up to my house, and so I came down there, and he had him over to the road. He'd come to enough that, and so we took him to the hospital at Chickasha, but he was unconscious when we got there, and they tried different things, but he was just too near gone. So if we'd have known what was wrong the evening before when he had the headache, well, it may not have happened. But I asked the doctor, and he said, well, it was just a weakness, kind of like in an inner tube, and if there's too much pressure on it, it bursts. Well, I guess that when he stooped over, I guess that's what happened. That the pressure from stooping over and burst that weak spot. So
there's just no telling sometimes.
Kenny was 15 and Terry 13 when he died.
And how old were you?
I was 34.
So, but it sounds like
he was 37, almost 37.
Sounds like you pulled things together and had a good run with the post office.
Yeah, I married 3 years after Quentin died, and this Frank, that's who I married, and we used to ride the school bus together. He never married, and he told everybody if he couldn't have me, he wouldn't take anybody. So, we were married almost. Well, it was a little over 49 years. So,
Wow.
and he was a farmer,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a good farmer.
Mostly wheat or corn?
Wheat, and he ever so often maybe he'd plant cotton, and then he would plant stuff for cows, hay grazer or something like that. And we had cows. One year, we had a 100-acre place over on the highway, and we had a dentist appointment, and he didn't show up. And I called the dentist and told him, I said, something's happened because he hasn't come, and it was time we need to be at the dentist. And so when he came in, I said, we've already missed our dentist appointment. He says, you can't imagine what happened. And I couldn't. And he said, somebody stole every one of our cows over there. And they took them to Missouri to sell them at an auction. And for some reason, somebody found out about it. And they found the man that did it. And he was supposed to pay us back in 5 years. He paid about half of it. And after 5 years is up, well, he quit. So,
Did
anyway.
you ever get any of those cows back?
No. He'd sold them to a butcher to have them butchered.
Oh.
So,
Well, how many head did you have at that time?
I can't remember how many was over there.
And about what year would this have been?
Do you remember?
That's probably a story they didn't tell the grandkids.
Probably not.
So there was still some cattle rustling going on.
Yeah. Let's see. I can't remember what year that was.
Well, just to kind of get back to some I guess bigger questions, overall. What world events do you think had the biggest effect on your growing up? You mentioned the Depression and the Dust Bowl and World War II. Was there anything else that you can?
No, I can't think of anything.
Okay.
I just went along with life and didn't.
Yeah. When now you talked about what you ended up doing with the post office and so on. When you were growing up, what did you think you wanted to be?
Oh, I just wanted to be a wife and a mother.
Mm-hmm. That was the plan.
That was the plan.
Mm-hmm. Of the different options that were out there, were there things that were there certain things that seemed opened or closed, or I mean, was there anything you wanted to do that you didn't think you could have? Or
not really. When I was in high school, on Saturday, I went to help a lady at the beauty shop, and I thought I would like to, fix hair, and but I never did pursue that. I just fixed my own.
Yeah, we talked a little bit earlier about some of the things like youth group and some of the community events. Are there community traditions in Tuttle, things that they still do today that they used to do when you were growing up?
Well, yeah, they go to church camp, and I remember when I guess I was a teenager, we went to Duncan to a group, and we stayed in a home with a lady, and I remember she fixed waffles with strawberries on top, and I'd never eaten that, and I thought that was the best breakfast.
Well, that sounds like a good combo. What traditions or customs from your growing up have you made an effort to preserve? I mean, are there things within the family or the community that?
Well, no, I don't think so.
Okay. in the same vein, are there any particular stories that your grandparents or your parents told you that you pass on to the grandkids? Or?
Well, just the telling about when they lived in the dugout, you know, and I had an uncle that he and his wife were school teachers, and they were quite storytellers. And when they would come to my grandparents, we always were interested in the stories they had to tell, but they could tell something simple to make a good story out of it. But my grandparents would tell about living in the dugout, and I just thought that was such a terrible life to live, or such a hard way to live. But
do you remember hearing any stories about your grandfather and coming over in the land run? Or
well, yeah, it was told that maybe he might have been one of the Sooners, but I'm not sure that he was. So, but they came from Kentucky, and back in my mind, it seems like I remember that his sister was taken by the Indians, and I didn't hear much about that, but it is back in my mind that I remember that they said that she was, and none of them came to Oklahoma, and so I wasn't too familiar with any of his relatives.
So that would have been back in Kentucky.
Yeah, back in Kentucky. Yeah.
What kind of values do you think your parents and your grandparents instilled in you when you were growing up?
Oh, the moral values was very important to them, and they that was just, well, they wanted us to be morally good people.
Mm-hmm. Now, looking back on things, throughout the course of your life, what do you think has given you the most satisfaction, or what are you the most proud of?
Well, I grew up in the church, and I think that was very important in my life.
And which church, especially were you at the same one in Tuttle that you grew up in?
Christian church, and that was one my grandparents went to, and we did, and so it just was a natural thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And Mama loved to study the Bible, and she was taught a class, and she loved to teach Bible.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that she wanted to be a missionary. Did you hear a lot of the stories when you were growing up too? A lot of Bible stories. Did you help teach Sunday school when you were younger, or some of the younger?
Yeah, I did.
Kids?
I taught Sunday school back when my kids and kids later on were.
It's a good way of knowing who's in the community. I mean, you meet a lot of folks that way. Yeah. What is it about Tuttle? I mean, with the exception of about 4 years, it sounds like you've been in Tuttle most of your life. What is it about that area that you really like?
Well, of course, knowing people, and you know who belongs to who, and it's changing though. You go someplace and you think, am I at Tuttle? It just, you know, there's so many new people, and all the older ones are leaving. They're gone. And in the church where I go, there's one lady that's 102, and another one that's 93, I think. And then I'm at 89. We're the three oldest people in the church. And used to, there was, you know, several older ones, but they're all gone now. So.
How big was Tuttle when you were in high school, say?
Well, there was 40 in my graduating class, and now they have over 100. So
Wow.
that is, I guess, would be comparison to what.
Mm-hmm.
You remember how many was in your class, Kelly?
Yeah, well, there was 100, and one person died right before graduation, so he had 99. But it was about a 2A size school, so busing in the 60s was what really beefed up the Tuttle area, which is it's about 30 miles away from Oklahoma City. So that's kind of when our size doubled. It was probably 2,000 or 3,000 when I was born in the 60s. It's about 5 to 7 now, I think. So it could have been 1,200, 1,500.
Well, having lived in Oklahoma your entire life, what does Oklahoma itself mean to you?
Well, it's a good state.
Well, what's the one thing, if you had a chance to pick something that you want people to really remember about you, what would that be?
Well, that I tried to do right.
Well, is there anything that we haven't covered, anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't touch on? Or?
Can you think of anything, Kelly?
Oh, goodness. You know, I sent them some of your memoirs, which I guess she's seen, so I can't really think of anything. I think some of the humorous stories, maybe if you could share one of those, that might be fun.
And what story?
The funny stories, like when the opera house and the man that lived under it.
Oh,
so
yeah.
you could tell our funny story or
Oh,
something,
yeah.
you know.
You know, this opera house that was Walcomas. And I don't know how the story got started, but they said there was a little old man lived under there, kind of like an elf or something. I don't know. It was just a story that got started. And if we went by this opera house at night, we were very frightened, and we would watch to see that he didn't come out. And no one ever saw him, but anyway, they said that there was a little old man lived under there, and that was a story that it was told to the kids. And one time, my sister and brother, we'd gone to a Methodist revival, and it was snow on the ground, and it was slick, and my sister was walking along in front of me, and I was looking over toward that building to see if the little man was coming out, and she fell, and I didn't know she fell, and I fell over her and broke my collarbone.
Oh, dear.
And my folks heard me crying, and they were at the door to meet me by the time I got there. And I remember I had to be out of school for a long time because I couldn't raise my arm to put my coat on, and it was, of course, in the wintertime.
All because of the little man under the opera house.
Yeah, the little man under the opera house.
Well, if you have anything else you want to talk about, we can do that, or I can thank you for being so helpful.
You know, one time we were walking down the road, my brothers and sisters, and there was a bull over in the pasture, and of course we was afraid he was going to jump the fence and come after us. And we told Mom about it, and she got on to us because we said bull. She said, "That's an animal." And it was, of course, now you people use that. Animal was the right word to call the bull.
Okay. So you didn't want, yeah. You couldn't be too precise.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And we had some old buggy wheels that we'd take over to the pasture and ride down, and we'd guide it with our feet. And I guess one of the stories I remember back when I was little, I was probably maybe 3 years old. And we was going to Grandma and Grandpa's, and we were in the buggy, and Mama was driving the horse. Well, there was a bridge we had to cross, and the horse would not go across that bridge. And I remember I was really frightened, and I think the reason that I was frightened was because the horse balked. And I don't know why, being that young, I would remember that story, but I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we finally got on to Grandma and Grandpa's because, but I remember it didn't want to go across that bridge.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that was someplace the horse had been before too, and all of a sudden just decided,
yeah, they didn't want to cross that bridge.
Mm-hmm.
But I've lived in way back there.
Mm-hmm.
The horse and buggy till airplane and astronauts and all that.
What do you think the most impressive change you've seen is?
Most impressive thing.
The most impressive change from when you were growing up to now.
I just going to the moon, and those things. I just can't fathom it. That and so fast they have to go to get up there.
Mm-hmm. Just seems unbelievable.
It does, really. But
well, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time and your stories.
Well,
we really appreciate it.
Well, I hope it's okay.
Oh no, you did a wonderful job. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you.